Good morning, everybody. An old poem says, "The ladle, coming and going in the hell of heat and cold, has no mind and suffers not." So this month here in the Ohio Valley, it has been incredibly hot. Right? We've had extreme heat warnings day after day after day. Being in the Zendo in 4 layers of robes has been no fun for some of us. Some of these things are synthetic, don't breathe. So especially when the humidity in here reaches 81%, yikes. So there's nothing we can do about the heat, of course. Nature is going to do what nature does. Gulf Stream is going to do what it does. Jet stream is going to do what it does. We can get frustrated, we can get discouraged. It won't really change anything, right? We can't do anything about it. Nature is going to win. We are going to have to accept defeat. That is, our expectations, our assumptions are going to have to accept defeat. We've all got ideas about the best or the most acceptable, or what is acceptable, conditions for ourselves. Things should be a certain way. When things are a certain way, then we can do the things we need to do, or the things we want to do. We're going to keep fighting for those conditions or circumstances, but at some point, we're going to have to accept defeat. And then what, right? What do we do now? The ladle coming and going in the heat, in the hell of heat and cold, has no mind and suffers not. So the ladle continues to function whether we're putting it into a bowl of ice or we're putting it into a pot of boiling soup. It has no mind and suffers not. In other words, it sets up no expectations, it makes no distinctions, it doesn't set up the causes for suffering, which in a nutshell is the conviction that things should be other than they are, right? This is basic suffering. Things should be different than they are, other than they are. Regardless of conditions, that ladle carries on its function. It doesn't need to have a personal opinion about its circumstances. In the 16th century, there was a Soto Zen monk named Kaisen, and he had a supporter named Shingen Takeda, who invited him to come and live in a temple over which apparently he had some control or was on his property. The name of this temple was Eirinji. Sometime later, Shingen's son, Katsuyori, was attacked and defeated by Nobunaga Oda, who's a famous warlord, if you know any Japanese history. Most of the Takeda forces fled to Eirinji, to this temple where Kaisen was. Kaisen gave them shelter. When Nobunaga heard about this, he became violently angry, right? Very upset. Kaisen refused to surrender those Takedas, and Nobunaga drove all the monks up into the tower of the temple gate and set fire to the tower. This is his retribution. Kaisen calmly says to his monks, "Well, this is finally the end. Of course, we are discharging our debt to the Takeda family, but in any case, we could not have simply handed over to the enemy people who had sought refuge in the sleeve of the robe of the Dharma." Isn't that a great phrase? We could not have simply handed over to the enemy people who had sought refuge in the sleeve of the robe of Dharma. We will die bravely and loyally with the others. So then he asks each monk that's there with him to recite a death verse. This is a traditional thing to do. And then Kaisen says, "Calm meditation doesn't require peaceful surroundings. If the mind is clear, fire itself is cool." So this is a famous historical incident, defeat of the Takeda clan in 1582. I think Kaisen in some way is asking us to consider what defeat really means. What is the nature of defeat? Clearly, in a physical sense, he is defeated, right? He's up in a tower. The tower's on fire. He's got nowhere to go. No one would say that was an optimal outcome for him in that moment. And he refuses to surrender these refugees. But he also refused to surrender in that he didn't let his circumstances stop him from practicing. I mean, talk about the hell of heat and cold, right? And in those circumstances, he refused to stop practicing. He didn't need peaceful surroundings to have a calm mind. He just needed to see clearly and wisely and not hold, set, carry unrealistic expectations. He also needed to have a deep sense, I think, of his own purpose, his own sort of moral order. Morality means that we recognize we have some responsibility to and for other beings. It's as simple as that. Kaisen had no doubt that he had a moral responsibility, right, to these people who had sought refuge in the sleeve of the robe of Dharma. I love that. That firm sort of moral foundation, a deep understanding of what he valued and why, allowed him to remain peaceful in the face of defeat, in the face of disaster. So that means he has to have done some serious discernment about that stuff. What do I value? What do I believe? And why? And we know that is a key component of spiritual health. So when the decisive moment came, he was able to see clearly with wisdom and with compassion and accept the reality of the moment without layering on a lot of additional suffering. This isn't fair. Things should be other than they are. Why me? So as Ryokan says, when it's time to be sick, it's okay to be sick. And when it's time to die, it's okay to die. That's what's going on in that moment. Can we see that clearly and face that squarely? When the heat index is more than 105 degrees, here, it's okay to be uncomfortable. That is okay. That is the reality of that moment. In other words, I think there is a time to stop struggling against our lives, to stop struggling against our circumstances. We need aspiration. We need direction in order to take any kind of action, right? We need some moral framework if we're going to make decisions every day. We need high ideals so we have something worthwhile for which to work, right? So we have a reason to get up in the morning and go forward and do useful things for people in the world. We also need to know when to dissolve the boundary between where we are right now and somewhere else we'd rather be. What conditions we're in this moment and what conditions we'd rather be in. Between the real conditions of this moment and the fabricated conditions of our ideals. That does not invalidate our ideals, right? But we need to see when it's time to collapse that boundary. In that moment, there is no winning and losing. There is no victory or defeat. Sawaki Roshi famously said, gaining is delusion, losing is enlightenment, right? We've all heard that one before. Gaining and losing can be about belongings. They can be about concrete things, right? Gaining too much stuff is not a good idea. Being able to let go is awakening. So that's one form of non-attachment, right? If we're considering this teaching with regard to concrete things or things we own. We can also, I think, consider his teaching with regard to winning and losing, not being attached to victory and being able to accept defeat. So as wonderful as it is to set a direction, to set an aspiration, to have high ideals and to work for those, things will not always go our way. We won't always get what we want. It would be nice if that was not true, but we know from life experience that is not how things go all the time. If the only acceptable outcome is getting the prize, then what do we do when the inevitable happens? At some point, we don't get the prize. What do we do then? Clinging to prizes or victory is delusion. Letting go of attachment to prizes or victory is enlightenment, if we're going to take the teaching of Sawaki Roshi. Calm meditation doesn't require peaceful surroundings. If the mind is clear, fire itself is cool. If the mind is clear, we dissolve the boundary between hot fire, cool breeze, between victory and defeat. The consequences of each of those things are different. They are not the same in certain kinds of ways. But we can be equally accepting of those outcomes as they arise. Hot, cold, victory, defeat, life, death. We can be equally accepting of those outcomes as they arise. On that basis, we can take the next step, whatever that next step needs to be, in a skillful way. Once a monk in training asked Great Master Dongshan, when heat and cold come, how can I avoid them? Dongshan said, why don't you go where it's neither hot nor cold? What is this place of no heat or cold? Dongshan replied, when it's hot, become one with the heat. When it's cold, become one with the cold. That is the place of no heat or cold. That's a famous story, right? We've probably all heard that one. We can put heat and cold on a spectrum or on a scale. And then we can see there's really no difference. At what point does heat become cold? Where is the hard boundary on that scale, on that line? We get the same teaching, I think, about life and death. As soon as we're born, we start to die. We're on an inevitable pathway toward the end of life. At what point does living become dying? Where is the hard boundary? We're defeated by death from the very beginning, if we want to think about that. Think about it that way. As soon as we're born, we're defeated by death. There's no getting out of it. Death is going to win. Nature's going to do what nature does. If the only acceptable situation is living, then what do we do when the inevitable happens? Clinging to living is delusion. Letting go of clinging to living is awakening. Letting go of clinging to victory is awakening. Letting go of hot and cold is awakening. All of this points to our need for control, right, as human beings. Because control means we win. If I'm in control, I win. We want to control what comes up in our zazen. We want to control our experience of practice. We want to control our habituated thinking so we don't keep making mistakes and breaking precepts and being unskillful. We want to control the outcome of our actions to make sure things unfold in a certain way. Make sure our karma unfolds in a certain way. And of course, the irony is that we only win when we stop trying to win. Liberation doesn't come from winning. It comes from not needing to win. Sometimes you might win. That's good. If you don't, it's okay, right? You can accept that defeat. Engage in vow and repentance if that's what needs to happen. Hello. Defeated by my microphone. So, engage in vow and repentance if that's the next thing, if that's what comes up next. And then simply do the next thing in the most skillful, wise, compassionate possible way. Sometimes our practice can become a battleground between ourselves and ourselves. We really want to defeat the ego. Somehow we've heard a teaching, this ego has to be conquered, right? We really want to defeat that ego. We really want to defeat the things about ourselves that we don't like very much. And we start to get clear about that in our practice. When our practice is reflected back to us and we sit and we kind of come to understand ourselves a little bit, we see things a little bit clearly. There's some things about ourselves we're not so happy with. We'd like to conquer those. We'd like to defeat those things because those things must be standing in the way of our awakening, right? And if we beat them back, then we win. We win something. We win the prize. Of course, we know this is not why we sit zazen. I hope we know. It might have been our plan when we took up this crazy practice, right? When we came in the door of the Zendo, of the Dharma Center for the first time, we probably had some agenda that said, I'm going to be someone I like better, or I'm going to get rid of my bad habits, or I'm going to conquer something that is in my way. And then someone said, well, you know, zazen is good for nothing. And we went, dang it. This was going to be my solution, right? Now I have to decide whether practicing in this way is still worth it. Why should I sit just for the sake of sitting? Why should I sit if zazen is good for nothing? Which is not the same as zazen has no outcome. Right? How will I know that I'm not wasting my time? So Aki Roshi said we should sit firmly in the place beyond any question of whether you are great or not. Where is that place? Sit firmly in the place of no heat or cold. Sit firmly in the place of no victory or defeat. Uchiyama Roshi says whether you defeat others or are defeated by them, you live out the self which is only the self. You never become someone else. Without being concerned about success or failure, go back to the self. So this is the true self, sitting in that place beyond hot and cold, where we make some diligent effort and then we accept the outcome, regardless of what that outcome is, because in the largest possible sense, victory or defeat is not going to change who we are. We are going to continue to be impermanent. We are going to continue to experience suffering in this human form. We are going to continue to be empty of a fixed and permanent self, right? 3 marks of existence. Those things are going to go on. Victory or defeat is not going to change, in the most basic way, who we are. Uchiyama Roshi goes on to say, without being pulled every which way through comparing yourself with others, settle down to the true self. According to Buddha's teaching, this is the essential way of pacifying the mind. It is the purest zazen. So here we are again. The ladle coming and going in the hell of heat or cold has no mind and suffers not. Calm meditation doesn't require peaceful surroundings. If the mind is clear, fire itself is cool. When it's hot, become one with the heat. When it's cold, become one with the cold. That is the place of no heat or cold. These teachers are all pointing to the same reality, right? Now, of course, it's not easy not to get sucked into a world of victory and defeat. Uchiyama Roshi's position was that conventional society is heavily constructed around this need, compulsion, right, for winning and losing. It's the basis of a lot of how conventional society functions. Ego wants to measure whether or not our lives are worthwhile by engaging in some kind of competition, some kind of comparison. It's just what the ego does. It's the human condition. That's what it's doing rather than seeing the entirety of the reality of this moment. If our habituated thinking didn't work like that, defeat would not be possible. We would deeply understand we are both individual collections of 5 skandhas and completely non-separate from everything there is. As soon as we have self and other, we have victory and defeat. As soon as we have separation, victory and defeat, winning and losing. You have to lose so that I can win. I compare me to you, or I compare my expectation with reality. The outcome of that might be disappointment and suffering. If I understand that there's no real separation between me and you, then I don't have to defeat you in order to win. We both win if you win. We both lose if I lose. Where's the hard boundary? Here's something else from Uchiyama Roshi. Good or bad luck is always our main concern. But in reality, is there good or bad fortune? There isn't. There are only calculations using our expectations as a yardstick. Precisely because we expect to make things profitable for ourselves, we regret when they aren't. Only because we compete with others do we experience as defeat the difference between our expectations and reality. True religion has nothing to do with human desire for profit or calculating measurements between expectations and events. It's human to have expectations, but clinging to them causes suffering. If we can loosen our grip on expectations and settle down on whichever side of the balance we fall at this moment, we find unshakable peace of mind and a truly stable life unfolds. Doing Zazen is ceasing to be a person always gauging gain and loss and evaluating life according to such calculations. To practice Zazen is to stop being an ordinary human being. To practice Zazen is to stop being an ordinary human being. To stop being pulled around by karma, instead be driven by vow. Right? We've heard that teaching before. To stop getting sucked into conventional thinking about winning and losing, right? To practice Zazen is to stop being an ordinary human being. Because he says, only because we compete with others do we experience as defeat the difference between our expectations and reality. I want things to be a certain way. The reality is they're not that way. I am defeated. What? So again, he's making the point. Peace, equanimity, stability come from not trying to win. I think we have to be careful not to take all those teachings to mean that we should be passive, that we should simply be inert and never do anything and never take any action or make any effort. These teachings are not saying we shouldn't have bodhicitta, we shouldn't have aspiration, we shouldn't have direction, we shouldn't make a plan. These teachings are not saying unwholesomeness should not be dealt with, that we should sit idly by, let things go on. These teachings are not saying we should never try to achieve anything in our lives, never try to go forward, never create momentum. Competition happens, right? Competition for job openings and scholarships and grant funding and tickets to that concert that was sold out last week, right? Our lives include some competition. That stuff in itself is okay. Our responsibility is our deportment, our attitude, our approach, our understanding in relation to competition. If the only acceptable outcome is getting the prize, then what happens when that's not what happens? So far we've characterized, or I've characterized, clinging to victory and avoiding defeat as an activity that's really deeply about self-interest. There's some self-clinging in there. I want to get my way because my small self will feel validated if I do, or I'm going to feel annihilated if I don't, right? Victory and defeat. What if the thing we're fighting for is the greater good? As bodhisattvas, we're out there to pay attention to the greater good. What if the thing we're fighting for is the greater good? I have an idea, and you have an idea. Or I'm presented with 2 courses of action. They are both aimed at liberating beings from suffering. For whatever reason, we can only choose one. Which one wins out? This is a moral drama. This is a setup for moral injury. We have two competing moral obligations. Both of these things are aimed at liberating beings. As bodhisattvas, we vow to liberate beings. What do? So a moral obligation is a duty that arises from our own conscience, right? This is our own sense of right and wrong. It feels like something we have to do, not just what we want to do. It is not a regulation imposed on us from outside. It is something very deeply held. There is something in our being that says this is a true, good, right, wholesome course of action. This one maybe isn't. A moral obligation doesn't feel optional. Even if we're under pressure by something to behave in some other way. In the case of moral injury, one moral obligation violates another. Right? We have two moral obligations that seem to be in conflict with each other. If we're whole and healthy, we align what we do with what we value. And when we don't do that, we have stress, we have distress, we have suffering. I should do this, or I want to do this, but I have to do that according to circumstances. It keeps me up at night. It feels like an impossible choice. There's no right answer, because somebody's going to suffer either way. Even though there's a competition here, I think, there is not a winner and a loser. And it's not because we've dissolved the boundary between self and other, and it's not because we've let go of distraction. It's because both options feel like defeat. So moral injury can create some real suffering, psychologically, socially, spiritually. It happens because of something we see. It can happen because of something we do. It can happen because of something we don't do. So guilt can arise, shame, anger, sense of betrayal, distress, dismay. It can be really quite intense. We can really feel quite bad about ourselves, especially as bodhisattvas. We keep taking these vows to liberate all beings. I did something, I saw something, I didn't do something. I have two moral obligations in conflict. That hurts. I mean, that suffering is real. In the face of that, we can start cutting ourselves off from relationships, not only because of the way we now see ourselves and judge ourselves, but maybe we've lost trust in the systems in which we were functioning, the people with whom we were working, the institutions we think are supposed to be taking care of us, functioning in a useful way. Our sense of meaning and purpose can really be challenged. So when we think about Kaisen up in the burning tower, his sense of meaning and purpose could have really been challenged there. If this sort of thing can happen in my world, in my circumstances, despite my aspirations, my vows, my intention to surround myself with wholesomeness, if this can happen in my world, what's the point? Despite our best efforts, despite our best aspirations, we can feel defeated in that moment. Not because we're incompetent, because winning was never going to be possible. Winning was never going to be possible. We can either turn over to the enemy those who came to us to take refuge in the sleeve of the robe of the Dharma and live, or we can protect them and die in the burning tower. So moral injury is where we are really hard-pressed to find that place beyond the hell of heat and cold. How do we have no mind and suffer not when we feel compelled to make our values and our actions inconsistent? So Todo-san reminds us it's important to see that it's not life that causes suffering, but our expectation that life should be the way we want. We can't live without expectation, but if we can handle the feelings caused by the difference between our expectations and reality, that's liberation. So notice he's not saying if we can ignore the feelings, if we can suppress the feelings. He says if we can handle the feelings caused by the difference between our expectations and reality, that's liberation. We handle those feelings by accepting them, not looking away, not denying them, right? Fully experiencing them, seeing them clearly with wisdom and compassion. And then taking all of that information, because that's a lot of information. We take all that information, and in the next moment, we do the next thing as skillfully as we can. There's nobody who's going to tell us what that is. There's no checklist. Based on your own wisdom and compassion and skill in that moment, what are you going to do? It's not life that causes suffering. Calm meditation doesn't require peaceful surroundings if the mind is clear. Fire itself is cool. So, I want to leave you with one of my favorite Uchiyama Roshi teachings. I've got this one actually pinned to my wall. If we think something is a big problem, for example, which of two things we should choose, we struggle to resolve it with our heads. But if we open the hand of thought, the problem itself dissolves. That one takes some chewing on. Defeat becomes defeat when there's a relationship between defeat and victory. Peace and calm become peace and calm when there's a relationship with agitation and upset. Living becomes living when there's a relationship with dying. Heat becomes heat. Cold becomes cold. Heat becomes heat when there's a relationship with cold. Right? We want to poke our heads in. We struggle to resolve it with our heads. Which of these things should we choose? So without a relationship, these things become one piece. This is Toda-san's phrase, right? Things become one piece. If there's one piece, then no comparison is possible. No conflict is possible. When it's 92 degrees outside and 79% humidity in here, that is the entirety of this moment in this place. That heat and humidity reaches everywhere. There is nowhere to go outside of here and now. Sitting zazen in 4 layers of robes. As long as we're resisting and struggling against conditions, struggling against our lives, we are defeated. When we accept conditions, then we can work within them, I think, to create some wholesomeness. So, what would you all like to say or offer or ask about what I'm going to call heat and defeat? Heat and defeat. I'm going to start with people here, and then we'll go to folks online. Comments, questions, reflections from people in the room. It's okay. It usually takes people a minute. Neil, get us started.
Yeah, so I like the focus on, I guess, acceptance. Like, you know, if it is hot, you know, being with the heat, or that acceptance isn't resignation, like that part. And I think the example of, you know, if it's hot in the zendo and humid, then I feel like there's a space there where I am thinking about, like, do I turn on a fan, right? And that is you know, kind of thinking about my, you know, aspiration, but like, what are the options available? Mm-hmm. And that if I decide no, that's just not a possibility, then maybe being with the heat. So yeah, I feel like there's that delicate balance between, absolutely, like thinking about, is there skillful behavior that I could do in this moment?
Sure, because if you have a fan, why not turn it on? I mean, this teaching is not saying suffer in silence. Yeah. Because what is that? That is martyrdom. Martyrdom is about your ego, right? And here we are again. If you have a fan and you could turn it on, great. If you're sitting zazen and you are not the jikido and you're not in charge of the conditions of the zendo, what are you going to do, right? So I think you've raised something important. So I think you've raised two important things, because there are two pitfalls here. One is, so you raised resignation and you raised, is there an action I can take? We are not talking about resignation. Becoming resigned is a conclusion about circumstance. That's about me. That's about my relationship to what's going on. I'm coming to the conclusion I have an opinion about something, right? So we can become, so be careful, resigned is a tricky word. That's why I use accept. Because what does accept mean? Accept means I completely see what's happening and I'm not looking away. That doesn't mean I think it's okay. That doesn't mean I accept that it's wholesome, because it might not be, right? So, acceptance is not approval, condoning is not, and compassion is not condoned, right? I can look around and very clearly see what's happening, and also very clearly see this is not okay, I need to take some action in this moment. So, when we're saying, look carefully and sit in the middle of that space and accept what's happening, bodhisattvas still vowed to liberate beings, right? If we're simply becoming inert, that's not necessarily carrying out our vow to liberate beings. So we have to be careful about resignation. And I think these teachings are not saying accept what's happening and don't look for options. Don't consider the options. Don't consider the actions you could take to change that circumstance if it needs to be changed. If there's a fan in the room and you can easily turn it on, why would you not do that? But if there is no fan, or getting up to turn on that fan and create some other problem, you have to evaluate the circumstances. So Bodhisattva is always looking around. What's the skillful action in this moment? And the skillful action might be action, and the skillful action might be not action. But that's always done with in an active way, not a passive way. Resignation feels a bit passive to me, right? So it's an active choice, moment by moment by moment, but it might be an active choice to do nothing. It's a very subtle teaching. Yeah. So you've raised two important things, I think. Other comments, questions in the room? Yes, please.
This is a little bit of a follow-up to Neil's question. There seems to be, for whatever reason, some kind of value in seeking out circumstances that are hard to accept. We practice this way that is harder to accept, but puts us in circumstances that are often harder to accept than other styles of practice. But no one here, I think, would say that there's something inherently correct about this way of practice, and that there might be people for whom the challenge of accepting circumstances are simply too much. But you also find people who, for whatever reason, aren't challenged by it. And so maybe it's not right for them either. So I'm curious how you think about that kind of discernment about the pursuit of austerity, and basically when does it become unwholesome?
Yeah. So Todo-san's been helping us with this since Sanshin was founded, because one of the teachings we used to hear from him most often was, our practice is not a torture. I think usually he said something like that before Sesshin. You might remember. Usually that's where we got that teaching. Our practice is not a torture. What does that mean? If I'm here to challenge myself, to prove something to myself, to prove that I can withstand this really tough practice better than the guy next to me, what is that about? That is about ego. That is not about seeing our practice clearly, right? That is about wanting an outcome. And we all fall prey to that. And I think I'm not wrong, you can tell me if I'm wrong, I think I'm not wrong in sort of observing over the 26 years of Sanshin's existence that we certainly from time to time had people fetch up here to do Sesshin in an effort to show that they could do the toughest practice out there. And partly I say that because that was me for a long time. I wanted to be doing the toughest, I wasn't necessarily here. I wanted to be doing the toughest practice possible. Why? Because I was trying to prove to myself that I could, and that I was worthy and valuable and valid and all that stuff, right? So we can certainly pursue austerity, to use your term, in a way which is not about letting go of ego. It's purely about feeding it. I want to be somebody. I want to be somebody to myself. I want to be somebody to the people around me. And yet one of the most important elements of our practice style here is non-reliance, right? We're not here to prove anything to a teacher or to the people around us, right? We're simply on the cushion because of our own bodhicitta. Of course, that stuff is going to come up for us from time to time because we're human beings, right? But what gets us in the door? So I think it's really interesting, and I am happy to see when people want to come and explore this style of practice and try it, because it may be different than what they do in their home sangha. Cool. And I hope that it's meaningful when they get here. Oh, how is it to practice without Dokusana lectures and work period and ceremonies? What is that like? Because that can be valuable, right? It can be equally valuable for us in this family, I think, to sometimes go out and experience somebody else's style of Sesshin or practice. Oh, what is that like? Can I keep Zazen in mind when I'm getting up off my cushion every 40 minutes and going to the next thing? In its way, that's a more challenging practice, right? We simply sit. We eat, sleep, and sit, and that's all we do. So we can ask ourselves, what am I trying to get from my practice? And how do I put that next to aspiration, bodhicitta, non-reliance, right? I think there's not going to, I don't think as human beings we can ever point to a time where that bodhicitta is entirely pure, right? I mean, let's give ourselves a break. But we can bear those teachings in mind and say our practice is not a torture. We are not here to mortify the flesh, right? And in fact, one of the things you'll start hearing about from Sawyer is that we're about to modify the Sesshin schedule because it felt like we were mortifying the flesh because we don't live here. We need time to get home and get back and get enough sleep that we can function, right? And that's sort of following in the vein of Uchiyama Roshi, who modified the Sesshin schedule when he got it. He said the human body needs a certain amount of sleep, right? So this is not about trying to do the toughest thing out there in order to be a certain kind of person. And I think we can get sucked into that in this family style, because we can look around and say what we're doing is tougher than other things that are out there, and who does that make us? And I think that's a question for discernment. Yeah. Anything to follow up there?
No.
Other things in this room? Neil Gannon.
I find your talk welcoming because I have one in my head similar to it.
So you give the next one, and then we'll compare it. And we'll see who wins.
Yeah, winner buys lunch.
Okay.
And one of the things that I find with the difficulty of one of the things that I find that makes life rather difficult is choice. What to do, when, where. I look at the problem that you have presented as being us relating to the world, but ignoring the world. And so we're saying, hey, it's not supposed to be this way. The tortoise is not supposed to beat the hare, right? But it happens. And when you see the tortoise, when you see that, tortoise beating the hare, what do? Do you get upset? Do you get angry? You go, oh, I'm a hare. I'm going to go. Can you see it? Can you tell I've been watching Bugs Bunny? I'm a hare. I'm going to go beat him and go out and do that. But I'm finding, the problem being you're dealing with the world without touching the world. The solution, include the world with you. Open the hand of thought, exclude yourself, and see what's out there. But it still doesn't, I'm not exactly sure, it doesn't provide a way or a mechanism for me to do a calculation to say, should I do this, should I not do this? For example, I knew it would be hot in here, and but I had to be here. Thank you, Sawyer. And and I go, oh, okay. So I'm going to go in and not wear my robe and just wear my rock suit and tie my sleeves up. I came in. Everyone has a robe. Everyone's dressed. I'm like, okay. And so I went full sheep mode, and I'm sweating unbelievably here. But I'm finding it difficult to really discern on how to make that kind of a decision between the two realms of being suffering and non-suffering.
So I think the phrase that leaps out at me in what you said is ignoring the world. And I don't think these teachings are asking us to ignore the world or to separate ourselves from the world. It would be easy to think that's what's being advocated here. I know you understand the difference. So there's a subtlety there. How do we completely accept, take in, be not separate from what's happening, and take the next step and do the next thing? Can we do that with what sometimes gets called choiceless awareness, right? Do I need to decide that this is too hot, or do I just exist in this moment, right? Do I need to decide that this outcome or that outcome or these circumstances or those circumstances are painful, uncomfortable, not good? Sometimes, yes, we do, because that's a toxic circumstance and we need to do something. If it's a matter of, where is the place between hot and cold, do I need to decide what hot and cold are? Is that helping me function in this moment? Maybe, if there's some action I need to take, but just in the purest kind of sense, right? I'm sitting zazen, it's 92 outside, it's 81% humidity in here, we're wearing 4 layers of robes. What are we gonna do? Do I need to decide in that moment of zazen that this room is too hot, or that this room is hotter than yesterday? Do I need to hold up a yardstick? Probably not. And there are moments in life where that's okay. And I think one of the things that this teaching is pointing us to is how much of our energy and how much of our habituated thinking goes into constantly having an opinion and coming to conclusion and making a judgment and making a comparison. Do we need to do that? Probably not all the time. Yeah. So I don't think this is asking us to create separation, to exclude the world, to ignore the world. And I don't think it's asking us not to be influenced by what's going on, right? There are moments we don't need to make a choice, and maybe we can find them, right? In the moment I don't need to make a choice, I'm not setting up a winner or a loser and a victory and a defeat, and then perhaps I have less suffering because it's not me against something, right? There can only be victory and defeat if there's two things in opposition. So it's just like our zazen when we sit facing the wall. Am I sitting facing the wall? Is there a separation between me and the wall? In zazen, the answer is no. Is there a separation between victory and defeat? Is there a separation between my expectations and reality? Can we dissolve that boundary? If so, I think we get a different perspective on suffering. Okay?
Mhm.
Now, please continue to chew on that. Other things in the room? Edo.
This is not a question, I just want to share a related experience.
Yeah.
Once when I was at a session at Hokioji in southern Minnesota where it was very hot and humid, like this. Anyway, we were 1 or 2 days into the session, and because I was a tenzo, someone talked to me and said, "How's it going with the new air conditioner?" I said, "What air conditioner?" Well, now we have an air conditioner in there, but it wasn't being used. So I went to the teacher, I said, "Why is it we have an air conditioner and we're not using it?" And she said, "Hot is hot and cold is cold." And she was trying to give a teaching, but my feeling was, okay, yeah, it's hot. It's still going to be hot even if we use the air conditioner, but we do have an air conditioner. Could we use it? And she did.
In mercy for those of you sitting in 4 layers of robes, because golly, when that place is hot and humid, it's hot and humid. Isn't that something? Well, yeah, interesting. Because it's not wrong when it's hot, when it's cold, cold. And also, if people are passing out, which happens down there, it's really hot and humid, right? I'll just say, when I was at Tenzo, I made sure we had things like cold tofu for meals because it was just so hot. So that's interesting. And not knowing the circumstances of that teacher, I'm not going to make a comment on that, but that's interesting. Yeah, that's
I'm sure she knows what the teacher is.
I don't actually. Ritoku.
I remember reading this little book when I was a teenager called Sin Flesh, Sin Bone.
Oh, yes.
Right, it's a delightful little book, and I wore it out, and I just read it over and over again. There was one particular story that stands out in relationship to this Dharma talk about a monk who is traveling down the road, and he gets mugged and killed. And it's said that as he's being murdered, he screamed so loud that villages miles away could hear him. Right? So I'm reading this and thinking to myself, wow, is this how monks behave? I mean, aren't they supposed to be scared, in control of themselves? Instead, he's being killed and he's screaming so loud that everybody could hear miles away. All that zazen control just disappear. It sort of shattered my notion of what a sage should be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's kind of relevant to what you're bringing here is it's that the Zen mind is not in denial of the human emotions, but is fully embraced and mindful of it, even at the same time it moves beyond.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And by the way, I'm assuming since you are complaining about the heat, you want the tea inside today.
Well, we'll see how the community feels about that. Yeah, I don't think these teachings, so I agree with you. I think it's kind of the same thing here. I don't think these teachings are encouraging us to ignore any part of our experience. The entirety of this moment here and now includes I'm being murdered and that's very painful and I'm shrieking, right? So to not fully enter into that is probably not authentic, right? But we certainly can have some expectations, right? About Sangha members, about Dharma leaders, about lots of people. We set some expectations and then we believe on the basis of our own expectations that there's some kind of contract there with the universe. Things are going to be the way I want. If they're not, the universe has violated the contract. What? The universe never signed a contract that said things were going to be the way we expect. So those kind of moments can be useful. And there are certainly teachers who will quite intentionally do the unexpected thing in order to break your expectation, right? In order to break your preconception about who they are. That can be done very skillfully, to the great dismay of the student. To the great dismay and disappointment.
Demonstrate.
Well, a really mild example is that when I arrived here, look who I was inheriting this place from, right? A lot of people had deep love and respect for Toto-san, and they're looking at me like, who the hell do you think you are to come in after the great and powerful Okamura Roshi? So I made sure for the first little while, I was the one who cleaned the bathrooms. I was the one who took up the trash. I did not wear samoe. I wanted to break the preconception that I was trying to be him. I was trying to be what people thought he was. There's a difference, right? Because I wanted people to see clearly, and I wanted us to be authentic from the beginning, right? I didn't want to come in with the idea that I was the next Okamura Roshi. That would have been defeat from the beginning. For a lot of reasons. It wouldn't have been real, true, healthy, right? But because I was coming, so I didn't come up in this Sangha. I trained and practiced in other places. So there were Sangha members who didn't know me. So when I arrived, I wanted to do some discernment and be kind of thoughtful about what is the first impression we create here. And because what we do from the beginning can set the karma for how we go forward. Right? So I very carefully did not try to match the expectations people had of the existing founder. That's one minor example. Clark had hand up too.
I started thinking when hearing your talk about, in relationships, there's that choice. Do I accept what this person is saying or doing to me, or do I react to it, respond to it? Does that become an ego thing where I'm going to win and lose? But on the flip side, there are times when accepting bad behavior from somebody is an unloving act. Mm-hmm. Because I'm reinforcing that
Absolutely.
behavior, right? So to draw a boundary in a relationship without winning and losing being part of that, right?
Absolutely.
Is a choice it seems like control, right? You must act this way around me. No, it's
right.
I'm going to just check out
mm-hmm.
if you keep up with that, because you do you, right? But the boundary is here.
Yeah. So there's a difference between winning and losing, and wholesome and unwholesome. And winning and losing is about me, what I need in this moment, my small self. But wholesomeness is about everybody. So wholesomeness includes this person that's across from me and apparently opposing me, right? So am I working for wholesomeness? And by wholesome, look at the word whole, right? Integrity, integrated, interconnectedness. Am I working for that? Or am I working simply to defeat this guy in this moment so I feel better? But again, you're raising something important, which is a toxic situation doesn't go unfixed. That's not what these teachings are about. But look at the many subtleties about how we have to be skillful in that moment, right? We have to identify what's the real challenge, and then what's this person's suffering maybe really about, and then how do I respond to that in a useful way? Because we make mistakes, we make mistakes again, we create those neural pathways that make it easier to make that mistake the next time, and if we're helping others to form those same neural pathways, we're not helping, right? So it can be useful to say, not okay, just not okay, right? These teachings are not easy, right? They're kind of subtle. Other things in this room. Will you want to facilitate people online in case I don't see anybody? Comments, questions from folks online? If you have any today. Abby.
Yes. I would just like to thank you for this particular Dharma talk. Well, for all your Dharma talks, but in particular for this Dharma talk, which I just struck home for me tremendously, and not in one aspect, but in many aspects. because it's so applicable at the level of personal practice and relational practice and political, social practice and metaphysics. I could see you moving through all those steps. And I just want to thank you.
Bless you. Thank you. Other things online or in the room before we move to world peace, which seems like a fitting capstone to this one. Please.
Sorry to ask two
It's okay.
questions. I don't come that often.
Nope, that's all right.
Making up for knowledge.
It seems like, one thing we're talking about is effort, kind of, obliquely, or maybe not.
Definitely.
Sometimes in my life, I talk to people about Zen practice who aren't practitioners. One of the many ways in which I disappoint them, I think, is trying to articulate a conceptualization of Zazen as a devotional act, ceremonial enactment of awakening. And it's the relationship between that and that conceptualization of our practice and effort is weird to me, because in a way, ceremonies are a little bit encapsulated from effort. So if you think of something like the Eucharist, it's somehow it's immune to effort. There's
Grace.
Yeah, you just get it, and I think in a way that I can't really articulate, there's something like that that's true of Zazen as well, and yet it does seem to require effort, and I find that really mysterious.
Practice and awakening are not two,
Yeah.
right? So we have to take some effort to take posture, breathe deeply through the nose, keep the eyes open, open hand of thought. 4 things we do in Zazen, right? We have to physically take this human body and do something with it. Get it on a cushion, put it in that circumstance. And then we do that. We take that breath and we settle. What is going on is not about you, right? So in that what is happening in that intersection, I think, is what we're investigating in Zazen. And I'm having to provisionally say things like we are investigating, right? Putting yourself in that intersection, form and emptiness, small self and universal self. That's what we're doing. So that is in some ways the purest experience of that intersection, but that intersection, of course, never goes away. Right? So it might be for a beginner the kind of context that's useful for you, thinking about Zazen as reenacting Buddha's awakening, which we do. We're under the Bodhi tree, right? For you, that may be helpful, and for the beginner, it might be too much. And it might simply be, sit down and see what happens. Yeah? Because we know that person Zazen who's never done Zazen before is exactly the same Zazen as yours and Dogen's and Buddha's. We're all stepping into that same place, right? So in a way, practice and awakening, not to. And yet somehow we have to do something with this body. We need enough bodhicitta to get up in the morning and put on our shoes and come to Zendo and sit down. And that's not easy. We like to be in bed, right? So there is effort there. And at the same, so what you're pointing to is this thing between self-effort and other effort, and that's a 3-week conversation, right? So I'm just going to point you that direction and say, please continue to investigate that, because I think it's really basic to our practice. Ado.
I just have a comment that's
Please.
kind of in response to this, and also something that was said earlier about how we may ask, what are we getting from our practice? Well, another question might be, what am I giving with my practice? Or what is my practice giving me? And realizing, and one of the ways I kind of experience this is I'm practicing gratitude. And it's not just for me, it's for everyone. And it makes a difference. I sort of, in a kind of a mystical way, you wouldn't like that word, but that what we do makes a difference, not just here and now with you, but eternally and infinitely. And I guess that's not just a belief, that's more of an experience or trust or something I just know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not just sitting there for me to get something. And anyway, I'm just thinking in terms of explaining to people why this might be devotional. I mean, some of us see it that way. To me, it also is devotional.
Mm-hmm.
And it's directed outward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, what is transcendence? Transcendence is about understanding that we are part of something larger than the small self. So we can put words like devotional, transcendent, ineffable, right? It's about that connection to something larger than ourselves.
Mystical.
And so when we come in the door, we think we're here for a piece of spiritual technology. I'm going to come and sit zazen so that I can improve my relationships and I stop procrastinating and I'm someone I like better. And then I hope very quickly we understand there is something else happening. Somebody is that Abby with a hand up again? Abby, please.
Yes. Well, to make this conversation suddenly very specific, I would like a little background on Myogin's dilemma about his robe. I'm not getting any sound right now. There we go. He said that he came in his rakusu and then wasn't sure if that was okay. And in considering this dilemma, I would just like to know if it is okay or not.
Okay, so before he answers that, I think I need to put in context the fact that the previous week we had done the precepts retreat, right? The 5-day precepts retreat. That was in the worst of the heat, and I told ordained Sangha, if you're feeling unwell, right, if this is really a matter of your well-being, and you really feel like you need to be in the zendo with a raksu instead of an okesa, if you really need to tie up your sleeves just to manage your well-being, I think we need to accept those circumstances. Typically, we would never do that. We would always look like this, right? If I was in a Japanese soto, that would not be an option. But I'm feeling like maybe we need to take care of each other. So I myself, for much of that week, was not in full kit. It was just too hot, right? So coming from that context, where for a week or 5 days, that was an acceptable way to be in the zendo, he arrives today and looks around and says, is that still true? And he's going, I have to make a choice. Right? I'm looking around and given that everybody else is in full kit, I think I need to be in full kit too, right? That's a little bit of context to just perhaps help him understand his dilemma, but I don't want to have you not answer.
I couldn't hear the question clearly.
Okay, she's asking about, when you were coming in and deciding, could I just wear raksu? Do I have to wear okesa? Can I roll up my sleeves? Like, she's wondering, is it actually okay to come in minus some of those pieces? Like, is that an actual choice?
I have no idea, actually.
He has no idea. And then, so anyway, but I think that was the context for why it was a choice, because usually it's not a choice.
Because it has some implications for practicing when you don't feel well.
Well, when it was just so hot and there's nothing we can do about the heat and there's nothing we can do about the humidity, your only choice is to maybe wear less, right? But typically we would never ever do that. And so I made it okay for those 5 days. I hung a sign on the door and said, ordained Sangha, please mind your well-being. I was concerned I was going to have people passing out. So in that circumstance, the expectation was clear. Today, for him, the expectation was not clear. Is that okay?
Yes.
All right. Other things before we move to the World Peace Ceremony, which today will be officiated by Kanzan.
Owen had his hand up.
Owen, please.
Mention of the Eucharist, and I think calls to mind a way to frame what I'm a little bit interested in. And it's, the Sermon on the Mount, he says, yeah.
She can't hear you. Can you speak up?
In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus, he says, blessed are the poor, for they'll be the ones that inherit the kingdom of heaven, right? Which I think understood as something like, defeat in the body or defeat in material circumstances doesn't preclude us, or maybe even leads to spiritual victory, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I could see a way to hear the story about the burning tower in that framing, right? Which I don't think is really what's happening, but
right.
I can imagine in our own lives, right? We can get
well, somehow I'm humiliated in my circumstances, but, I can see that or interpret it in such a way that I still end up feeling like vindicated or,
Absolutely.
I just wonder about catching that.
Yes. So Todo-san has sometimes tried to help us understand the nature of sacrifice. And if we're looking at something like altruism is we're doing good for other beings at a cost to ourselves, right? So we can take that sort of broadly to mean the Bodhisattva is about sacrificing. Well, you can only sacrifice if there's me and other, right? If things are one piece, you can't sacrifice, right? Because there isn't that gap. So if we truly understand how the Bodhisattva moves through the world, seeing everything as one piece, Bodhisattva is not sacrificing. So we could say if Kai's ends up in the burning tower and he knows what's going to happen here and he makes his moral choice, if he's seeing everything as one piece, he's saying this is not sacrifice. This is me acting on my sort of moral convictions, but this is not about my ego and I am sacrificing for something else, right? There is a circumstance and I am carrying out Bodhisattva activity as I see it, but not in a way which says there's me in opposition to something else. That's a very short answer because that's a complicated question. But I'll just say, I'm just going to validate that by saying Todo-san's been talking about that for a long time. It is a very real question. What is sacrifice about? So because you were at the precepts discussions, that stuff comes up in those conversations about morality and ethics, and it's worth investigating because we can really set a lot of ego on that. Am I not the great, wonderful, martyred Bodhisattva because I'm going to give up this piece of chocolate cake that I dearly want so that you can have it? Well, is that really generosity or is that me building my ego? Right? And it's not pure. There's a little of everything there. So, for now. Ado.
I'm not sure if this is related, but I wanted to add a little PS to my little thing that has come up, and that is, I said practicing gratitude. Well, or talked about giving, and another way of seeing this is that, it's a response to effort. My effort, the effort of my practice is giving. It's giving. And that's what I'm practicing on behalf of all beings. And so, I'm there to save all beings. That's why I'm there. That's why I'm making an effort. I'm making an effort for everyone.
But that's also not you making an effort, right? That's also Jiji Yutsamai. That's also just the functioning of this moment, which we can take our egos out of and say, I'm not sacrificing my energy for something or somebody out here that is not me. This is simply total dynamic functioning. This is what's going on in this moment. So in that way, we can remove that covering of label that says sacrifice or even personal effort in a certain kind of way. Doesn't mean we don't make personal effort, right? But that's not entirely what's going on.
It's a giving that doesn't have a target or
exactly.
We could say it's
three wheels of giver, receiver, and gift.
Maybe practicing generosity.
Can it be put in a little different way, even like in the Eightfold Noble Path, to think of right effort or perfect effort as effortless?
Sure. Because
right effort or perfect effort as effortless.
Oh.
Yes, because there's no self and other and attachment to something. Yep. Absolutely. Anything else this morning before we move to world peace? Which feels like a reasonable capstone to this conversation. All right. Thanks, everyone. Let's do our closing chant.